Welcome to the Westcott Crochet channel and welcome to this retro styled jacket. This is a pretty hefty project, so I split it in half with part 2 to follow. If you like what you see, let me know with the like button. If you want to see more, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell. For this project, any yarn recommending a 4mm hook will create a similar result. I used a 4.5mm hook. I also used a tape measure, stitch markers and a yarn needle to weave in my ends. I need to start with a chain which goes from my waist, where I'll be tying the belt, up to my underarm. I need 19 centimetres. I'm going to add an extra centimetre just to allow for contraction. This stitch pattern just contracts a tiny little bit. I'll let you know how many chains I end up with. Kicking things off as always with a slip knot. And here I go with my chain. I ended up with 28 chains plus an extra one to turn. That turn chain is there purely to build up my yarn for the next round. I'll always start each round second loop from my hook. So this first row is just going to be single crochet. I insert my hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops all the way down. On to row 2, and I'm going to be working the thermal stitch. I'm actually going to work a combination of thermal and back loop stitches. The thermal stitch brings thickness to the fabric and the back loop brings me texture. I'm still going to be working single crochet for this thermal stitch, but not through these top 2 loops as I would normally for a single crochet. I'm going into the back loop from the last row and the exposed loop from the row prior to that, which in this instance is the start chain, so it's a little bit fiddly. But once I'm in, it's just a regular single crochet from there. So yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So the back loop from the last row and the exposed loop from the row prior to that, and single crochet. After this first row it gets a lot easier because the second loop becomes way more prominent, so I'll just persevere with this all the way down, matching back loop to bottom loop to the end. At the end of row 2, I don't know if you can see, but the back loop is now already looking more accessible and it'll only get better from here. Row 3, I've already chained 1 and turned, so in through the back loop, in through the bottom loop, and single crochet, same as before, all the way down to the other end. At the end of row 3, it's a little bit frustrating because the work doesn't seem to have grown much at all. Within the first few rows, the stitch causes the work to curve back on itself, but in doing so it forms a ridge which pushes those bottom loops up towards the back loops from the last row, and that facilitates the thermal stitch. From here I'm going to alternate between back loop single crochet on the front of my work and thermal single crochet on the back. The thermal stitch creates a flat finish as well as thickening up the fabric, and the back loop creates a nice attractive textured finish. As well as switching to back loops from here, I'm also going to start working increases at this end. So at the start of the back loop rows and at the end of the thermal rows, and that's going to create a nice little slope to my underarm section. There's 2 ways I can do this. I can put 2 stitches into the first stitch on the next row, or I can chain twice at the end of the last row and put my first stitch into the second chain from the hook, which is what I'm doing. Then I'm going to back loop single crochet the whole way down to the end, where I'll turn and come back with a thermal row. I'll be at the end of that row next to work the increase. And here I am. To increase at the start of the thermal row, I'm simply going to put an extra stitch in along with the last stitch, and that takes care of that. I'm already forming now a little slope for the underarm section. From here I'm just going to work those last 2 rows on repeat, so chaining 2 at the start of the back loop row, working then into the second chain from my hook to work that increase. At the end of that row I'll turn and come back with a thermal row, increasing into the last stitch with an extra stitch, until I get a section which reaches from the middle of my underarm over to the front of my body. I'm back, and this is what I now have. This is my completed underarm section. It has a decent little gradient working up the underarm area here. I've worked 17 rows and 14 increases, so my stitch count has gone from 28 to 42. I have 7 centimeters across here. I ended it on a thermal row because I need to be at the top for the next bit. Next I need to increase the height of this front panel so that it goes all the way up to the top of my shoulder. I need a panel that measures 38 centimeters from the bottom to the top. I currently have 27 centimeters, so I need to add on 9. If I take my tape measure, I can measure out 9 centimeters from the top here, and I can count that I need 13 stitches within that 9 centimeters, so I need to add on 13 chains. That's my chain. I'll of course chain an extra one to turn, and then I'll work back down the chain with a single crochet. I'll meet up with the regular stitches on the main section and back loop single crochet down to the bottom, where I'll turn and thermal stitch my way back up, including up this new section. Of course, the new section, the bottom loop from the thermal stitch, will be picked up from this new start chain. So I'll work all the way down to the bottom, all the way back up to the top, and that's where you'll find me next. I'm going to be working a detail section across my front panel, and I want to be able to centre that section, so I need to take a few measurements at this point and work out exactly where it's going to go. I measured shoulder to shoulder from the outer edges, and I get 35 centimeters. From where I just built up with the chain over to the edge of this panel, I need 2/3 of that 35 centimeter measurement. I worked up a small swatch of the detail that I'm going to add. Using my 4.5mm hook, it measures 9 centimeters. You may want to pause on this next clip because here comes the maths. 35 is my shoulder to shoulder measurement. I multiply that by 0.66 to calculate the 2/3 that I need to work the rest of the width on this panel. From that width I deduct the 9 centimeters I'll be working for the detail section. That leaves me with 14. I divide that 14 by 2, and that tells me how much I need to work before and after the detail section to centre it. And here I am. I've worked my 7 centimeters, and from this point marks the start of the detail section. To begin with, there's essentially no change to the pattern. The first row is still back loop single crochet. The second row will still be a thermal single crochet, but the next 2 rows after that will also be thermal rows, and that will temporarily ditch the front ridges and flatten out the small portion for what's to come next. I've worked those first 4 rows, so a back loop row followed by 3 thermal rows, and that's nicely flattened out this little section here in preparation for the pipe that I'm going to add along on this next row, which otherwise I've gotten lost. Next I'm going in with the first of 3 pipes. I've already chained 1. I'll still be using the same 2 loops as if I were performing a thermal stitch, but it's going to be the reverse single crochet, so I'll be coming at it from the opposite side. So this is my first loop and this is my second loop. I'll just back up out of there and spin around because I'll be coming at it from this direction. I'm going to hold on to my loop because it wants to get away and I don't want it to do that. So in through these 2 loops from bottom to top. There we go. I grab a loop, pull it back through the way I just came. So I've got 2 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. It's a little trickier to start with because you've got nothing to hold on to at this end, but it gets easier as you work down the row. So in through the loops, pull a loop back the way you just came, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops. And what that's doing is it's forming a wrap just around the 2 loops from the previous row. This is normally an edging stitch to finish off an edge, but I'm using it here to form the piping because I couldn't think of another way to achieve that look. I'm going to work all the way down to the end and then I'll be back to explain what happens next. I have my completed pipe, the first of 3, which forms a nice little row along the edge there. I want to keep the back of this fabric nice and dense. The problem with that is after the piping row I have only 1 loop to work into, and if I work that 1 loop it's going to leave my next row a little gappy. So I'm going to have to recycle a second loop from the previous row just by digging one out and making it happen. So if I look at the stitch here, I have a curved side and a pointy side. I'm at the pointy side and I'm missing this bottom bit here, and that's the bit I'm going to have to dig out. I have to poke around a little bit, but it is in there. I hope you can see what it is that I'm doing. It is just a single crochet as normal once I've got my 2 loops. So I'm just poking around in the corner of the stitch at the pointy end and pick up the 2 loops and then single crochet. I'm just not sure if you can see what it is I'm actually doing. I feel like it's easier to work this stitch than it is to film it and show you what I'm doing. I'll just do a few more. That's 2 loops and single crochet. And dig around, get the 2 loops and single crochet. So I'm going to do this all the way down, and what it's going to do is it's going to push my pipe forward and it's going to look a lot more prominent as a result. I made it all the way to the end. It's a little bit fiddly, but it was worth it to get the look that I wanted. The last row is just pushed forward the piping a little bit and it's made it stand out a lot more. So for the next row I'm actually going to go into the back loops only because I want to leave 2 good loops for the row after where I'll be going back to the thermal stitch. And given that this next row is front facing, it's fine if it's just a back loop. So back loop single crochet all the way down this next row. As I turn back I'm going to come back to thermal and I'm going to go 5 more rows in the thermal stitch and I'll be back at that point. I'm back. Next I'm going to repeat everything from the pipe onwards. I'm not going to film it because this video is already going to be long enough, so if you're following along I've added a timestamp in the description box to skip back to that point. You'll need to skip back twice to complete all 3 pipes. After that final pipe, work the back loop single crochet row and then just 3 more thermal rows. Back again, I've worked all 3 pipes and I've also worked my 7 centimeters of alternating rows to take me to the end. The last thing I need to do is to tidy up this edge. The thermal stitch leaves a messy, ridgy finish which needs to be closed off. That's what I'm going to do next. I just need to chain 1. I'm not just going to go into these usual thermal stitch loops, I'm also going to go into the front loop. So in through all 3 of these open loops. Okay, I've now got 4 loops on my hook. Yarn over and pull through all of those loops to slip stitch. So again in through all 3 loops and slip stitch. So I'll do that all the way down, and that'll close this all off, and it creates a neat edge, which I'll show you in a second after I've worked a couple more. There we go, all closed off. Now that I have one completed panel, I need to work a reverse of this for the other side. Again, I'm not going to film it to stop the video length from running away. I'll just talk through what I've done here. I started over on the left hand side. I counted the number of stitches from my final row on panel 1. That's the number of chains I start with on the new panel. I work a row of single crochet followed by 3 rows of thermal. Then I alternate between back loop and thermal to create the width I needed before the detail section, for me 7 centimeters. Then I work the detail section followed by the alternating rows again to create my 7 centimeter side section. So I have here the main portion of the left hand panel. Next thing to do is to work the decreases for the underarm section. If you remember over here, after I worked the increases, I worked up a chain of 13 to build up the height of the panel to the top of my shoulder. So to mirror that over here on this new panel, I count the same 13 stitches down and add a marker. This is where I'll start decreasing. Ended up at the top here, so I'm just going to slip stitch my way down to my marker. If I'd ended at the bottom, I'd just work my row up from here as normal. It doesn't matter, I don't actually need to slip stitch the end of this row here because I'll be adding a sleeve at this point, so it'll be tidied up at that point. As I said, I finished here at the top, so I'm just going to slip stitch my way down to my marker. From the bottom I would have just worked my way up thermal stitch and stopped 2 stitches short of the marked stitch. So for me, I'm going to chain 1 and slip stitch up to and including the stitch that I've marked. I'm going to work the slip stitch the same as I worked when closing off panel number 1. So in through all 3 loops, you have 4 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, in through the 3 loops, pull through all 4, up to and including the marked stitch. So here I've worked all of my slip stitches. I'm working on the front of my panel, so I'm working back loop single crochet, and to start I'm going to work the first 2 together for the first decrease. So in through the first back loop and pull up a loop, in through the second, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through everything. From here just 1 stitch in each to the end, where I'll turn and come back with a thermal row, stopping at the final 2 stitches. Here I am, just 2 thermal stitches to go. I'm going to work these together to form a decrease. So in I go through the first stitch and I pull up a loop. Now because I worked a back loop decrease on the last row, on this row I've got a spare back loop on this last stitch. I'm going to go for the loop nearest the top and ignore the other one. So in through the 2 loops, there you go, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through everything. From here I'm going to work the last 2 rows on repeat until I've worked all of my decreases, and I'm back to the stitch count from my very first chain way back when. starting with the back loop, decrease, back loop all the way down, thermal all the way back, decrease into the last two. All decreased. This is my end row. This was my start chain. I've swapped them over so I can hold them side by side. Here I have 28 stitches left, matching my 28 chains from the very start. Going back to the start, I started with a start chain and a row of single crochet, then 3 rows of thermal stitch. If I did the same thing on this side, it would be much thicker than it is as I did at the start. When you start the thermal stitch, it takes a while to gain any width, but it doesn't finish up in the same way. So to even things up, I'll complete this panel with a row of back loop single crochet, then I'll do a row of thermal, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch row to close off all my loops. After that, I can chain one and cut. I've gone and raced ahead again and made up an entire back panel. Again, in an effort to keep this tutorial to a reasonable length, I'm just going to quickly talk through what went on. So I started in exactly the same way as I started panel number 1, working the increases for the underarm. Then I chained up the height, continued working alternating back loop and thermal rows across the entire back section. This back section measures the shoulder to shoulder width, which I took for the front panels, which for me was 35 centimeters. Once I had that width, I then worked the decreases for the other underarm section and finished up in the same way as I finished panel 2. Now that I have 3 panels, I just need to join them. So onto the seams. Starting on one of the sides, the method is the same for both, so it doesn't matter which. Looking at the sides, on the one side I have the slip stitch row I've just worked, and I've got the nice double loop stitches to work the seam into all the way along. On the other side is where I started, and the thermal stitch has left only the single back loops available. I didn't cut my yarn after the back panel, I'm still attached. Had I cut it, I'd just make a slip knot and reattach. Doesn't matter. So in I go with my hook into my 2 loops on this side, and in through on the other side, the back loop and just any loop that's next to it, so I get a decent double loop connection. Just going to pop back on my working loop, tighten that up, and pull through everything. And I'm tangled. Okay. And chain 1 to secure. So again, in through the 2 loops that I have available on this side, this finished side, and on the other side, into that back loop that's left and any neighbouring loop, and slip stitch. There's no specific reason I've gone for a slip stitch for the seam here. A single crochet would work just as fine. I've just decided to go for the slip stitch. Sometimes it makes a difference if you're working for an invisible join. I'm not in this instance, it doesn't make any difference. So slip stitch or single crochet, whichever the preference. I just need to do the same thing the whole way down. It may look like you've got one side longer than the other. It's not, it's just that the thermal stitch is contracted in different ways at the start and the finish. I know that it's equal because I've counted stitches on both sides. So I'll just stretch it out to match and match my stitches on each side, and then I'm all good. I'll finish seaming up the sides and then I'll talk about the shoulders, just seaming up there. I have two sides now all seamed up. Here's what it looks like on the inside and on the outside, more importantly. So on to the shoulders. So on the front here, where I have my piping detail, I'm just going to fold the front over to form a lapel. Same on this side, just after the piping detail. Obviously I want the sides to match. So for my seam, I've already worked one on this side, and it goes from the outer edge of the shoulder over to where I've just folded over, just at the start of the piping section. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I've popped in my stitch marker here to indicate where I need to stop seaming or start seaming, depending on which side I start with. My marker sits just between two ridges on the front here. It's important that I line up the ridges going over the shoulder so that it looks nice and neat on the seam. So I'll be working my stitches in between each ridge on both sides, matching ridge for ridge. I've turned my outward facing sides in towards each other on the inside so that I'm ready to work the seam on the inside. I've just moved the stitch marker to the other side so I can see it. The ridges that I'll be stitching in between aren't usually visible from this side, but I can just take a peek in on the inside and locate them each time. Not a problem. So I'll insert my hook in through the marked stitch on both sides because I've already lined those up carefully. So I'm going to pop on a slip knot and pull that through, chaining one to secure. So take a little peek on the inside, find my next ridge and insert my hook. On this side I have no ridge because this is the part where I flattened out before I did the piping section. So I'm just going to eyeball where it should be, bang smack in the middle, and just insert through there and slip stitch. Again, just take a little peek, locate my ridge, same on this side, there it is. And just keep going, taking a bit of time, making sure everything's matched up neatly. Just make sure I grab a couple of loops for each stitch, just make sure I get a good firm join. Work to the end, chain one and cut. Here's a finished seam on the shoulder. That's the inside and that's the outside. And you can see all the ridges neatly lined up. I'm going to add to these lapels now. So just folding them out as they will be when they're worn. I have added a stitch marker at about the halfway point along this fold out section. Similarly, I've attached my yarn in the same spot on the other side, just making sure it matches the position. Stitch marker over here marks where I'm going to stop. I've attached where I'm going to start. I'm going to work a row of single crochet going all the way around, up this side, across the back, down this side to the stitch marker where I'll stop. So I'm working similarly to the way I did with the seam. I'm going to work in between the ridges and put a stitch in between the ridges. Where I don't have the ridges, I'll have to eyeball it, and then I'm back to ridges. So here we go. I'm going to work in my tail end as I go along. It's not necessary, it just saves me from having to do it later. So here I go with stitch number 1. Between the ridges. I'm going to mark that stitch just so that I know where to stop when I come back around. Into stitch number 2. And I'll keep going, one stitch between each ridge until I get to the shoulder section. At the shoulder, I'm going in at the ridge at the front, pull up a loop, the first ridge at the back, pull up a loop, and work the two together as a decrease. Then one stitch in each again, along this back section. And then when I get to the other shoulder, I'll work the last ridge on the back and the first ridge on the front together as a decrease. From there, I'll work up to the stitch marker, one stitch in each. I've worked all the way around, back to the stitch marker. Here, chain 1 and go all the way back. This time, I'm going to work back loops only. Single crochet, back loops only. When I get to the corners, I'll work the 2 stitches together again to form a decrease. Back round at the other side, I'm going to go all the way back again, but this time it's thermal. So in through 2 loops all the way around. I'll still be decreasing into the shoulders on both sides, and I'm actually going to do this twice now. So all the way to the other side, all the way back, exactly the same, thermal stitches, decreasing into the shoulders. I just wanted to show you, again as I come to work the decrease in the thermal row, these are my 2 stitches to decrease into. I've got 2 front loops, front stitches, and 3 back loops. So as we did when we worked the decreases for the underarm section, I've got the spare loop. I'm going to go into the exterior loop for the back loops, for those 2 and these 2 on the other side, and just stitch that middle back loop. Just ignore it. So I'm already into the 2 loops for this stitch, so I just need to pull up a loop there, in through the second stitch, skipping that middle back loop, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through everything for the decrease, and from there I'm back to normal thermal stitches. That's 4 rows on this section so far. From here I'm going to keep adding rows without decreases now until this section works out to roughly match the length of this section. So it will form an L shape. I'm going to go back to alternating between back loop single crochet and thermal single crochet. I want the thermal stitch to create a flat side on this front facing side. So my next row is going to be a back loop row, and that will form ridges on the underside. That's going to do it for me for the length of this section. I'm just going to finish it up with a slip stitch row, just to lash all these loops together as usual. I've finished the edge of the collar here, just going around with the slip stitch row. Now I turn to the bottom. I'm going to work all the way around this bottom edge with a row of single crochet. I'm going to put 1 stitch in between every ridge. Where I'm missing ridges, I'll just have to eyeball it and estimate where they would be just to get a nice even stitch. Inserting my hook into this bottom corner, pop on a slip knot, pull that through, chain one to secure. And here I go all the way around the edge, in between each ridge, one single crochet between each ridge. I'll be back at the other side. That round has tidied up the bottom here. I worked in all my tail ends at the same time. The next job, I'm going to add a band where my belt is going to sit. It's going to be about 5 centimeters, and I want it to be flat on this front side, so I'll be working thermal on the front and back loops on the back. So the next row I'll be working on the back, so I start with a back loop row and alternate from there. I'll work up my 5 centimeters and then I'll come back. There's my finished waistband. I ended up measuring 5 centimeters and I ended up on a back loop row. So I'm all ridged at the back and flat on the front. I need to work up one more row now on this band, but whilst doing so I'll be increasing my stitch count to allow for my hip width in preparation for the bottom section. I measured around the widest part of my hips, and from that I subtract the measurement that I currently have around this waistband that I've just worked. So hip measurement minus this waistband measurement tells me how much I need to add on to make room for my hips. I need 15 centimeters. I take a tape measure and I lay it against my work here and measure out 15 centimeters. And I'm going to count how many ridges fall within that measurement. I count 19 ridges. For every ridge, I'm going to add a stitch onto this bottom band. I currently have 135 stitches around the bottom band. To space out my 19 additional stitches, I divide them into that 135. So 135 divided by 19 is 7.1. So I round that to 7. As I work this next round, at every 7th stitch, I'm going to add a second stitch. Onto my increases, I'll be working a thermal row next, so I'll be increasing thermally. So my sum through up is 7 for the increase number, so I just need to work my 7 stitches. That's 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. And into that 7th stitch I put an extra stitch for the increase. And then I start again into the next stitch with number 1. And then I work 7 and into the 7th the extra stitch. And I'll do that the whole way around, and that will sort out my stitch count. I've sorted out my stitch count and left my yarn attached, and from here I'm just going to work straight down with the length that I want for the rest of my jacket. I start with a chain and I'm going to work up and down in rows from there. I'm going to work 35 chains, should give me the length that I need, and then I'm going to chain an extra one and work a row of single crochet. So chain down, chain 1 to turn, back up with a single crochet row. I've worked my single crochet row from the chain, And now I need to attach it to this waistband. I'm going to be attaching it in this direction all the way along, and I'll work this bottom section up and down in rows, attaching it to the waistband every time I arrive there. So here is the stitch I just worked out from, where I chained from. So I'm going to attach from the one next to it. I'm not going to be working into this front loop. I'm going to leave that empty all the way along. It's going to provide a nice little barrier between the waistband and this bottom section. So I'll be working into the thermal loops for this attaching slip stitch. So here's the next stitch. Skip the front loop, in through the 2 back loops, yarn over and pull through for a slip stitch, and that's how I'll attach it each time I arrive at the waistband. This next row, I start from the second loop from my hook. The first loop is the slip stitch I just worked. I'm going to be working a thermal stitch, and it's the tricky first row after the chain, so I'll have to struggle through and get the second loop from the chain, but struggle I must. I'll work all the way down with this first thermal row, chain one at the end, and work back up with a second thermal row. Okay, back at the waistband, just need to slip stitch into the next available stitch on the base, the waistband here. Remembering to use just the back 2 loops, leaving the front one open. Just take off the slack there, and then just wrangle myself around to come back up. There we go. As I come back up, skipping the first stitch because that's the slip stitch I just worked. I'm going to work back loop single crochet now, and back to alternating back loop and thermal. So I'll work down with the back loop, chain one at the end, back up with the thermal, slip stitch into the waistband, and I'm going to do that all the way around the waistband till I've got no more stitches to slip stitch into, and that'll see me right back round at the front on the other side. I just need to show you, as I'm slip stitching into the waistband, the points where I worked an increased stitch, I'm a loop short at the back. So I've got 2 front loops and just 1 back loop. I'm going to just recycle that back loop and use it twice. So I'm going to work the 2 front loops with just the back loop each time. I've gone all the way around my bottom section, up and down with rows. Should be 154 times, slip stitching that final row to lash up those loops. As you can see, a pocket has appeared along with a belt loop and a sleeve. Stick with me and I'll show you how I do all of that again on the other side. If you do all of that, you'll be some way towards this. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more. A huge thank you to those who already have, and to everyone, thank you so much for watching today.